Welcome to another episode of Be Real Talks. Today we have with us Osariemen Aiyevbomwan. She is a rising junior at Binghamton University, majoring in Africana Studies and Human Development. Born to 2 Nigerian immigrants and 5 siblings, the influence and importance of community is something that has shaped her personhood on every level. With every space she engages with, whether it be as a political correspondent, and now senior advisor for the Black Student Union at Binghamton, the VP of Multicultural Affairs for the University Scholars Program, or as a first-year research immersion researcher. Tapping into community and mutual aid has grounded the sibling, friend, student, and community member she's grown to become. Today, we're going to be talking about active advocacy, and we're specifically going to be focusing on work she's done as a student leader and managing her career. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really appreciative of the space being held for folks who are doing work on campus, and I know how important it is to, highlight advocates in the community, so thank you.
Of course. So just so we can get to know you a little bit more, how would you say your lived experience and identity really shaped your passion for social justice, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's been a long road to understanding for myself what social justice, equity, and inclusion has meant, because oftentimes I've sought spaces that pride themselves on diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? But even in these spaces, I've found myself othered. So I think as a dark-skinned Black femme in this world, as a Nigerian American with an ethnic name, these feelings of uncomfortability, of otherness have always interacted with me and kind of carried on to any space that I've been. And so really tapping at the root cause of what's been going on and affecting my experiences have definitely, influenced my understanding. So knowing the importance of uplifting and highlighting the most marginalized has been how I've come to understand social justice. I think tapping at the root and lifting those up at the bottom before we even alleviate the stresses of those we see in the space, we must identify who is not in the space and why they aren't there. And so, those critical questions and critical approaches to understanding justice in general is how I've come to understand them.
Yeah, I think it's great that you have that critical analysis in there, and it's like you base it on your personal experience, but then also kind of looking around and seeing, okay, who's not being represented in spaces that you're at.
Yeah, exactly.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar, there are, theories around inequalities based on skin tone, often referred to as colorism. So if we look at some research out there, it does show the lighter skin that you have, the more likely you are to earn more. And if we kind of think of these notions of beauty, right, even at a global level, it usually is kind of, when we look at marketing, it's linked to light skin, right? There's these ideas of light skin privilege for sure. So looking at your own personal experience, can you kind of talk to us about what colorism means to you and if it's caused any challenges for you?
Yeah, I think that even goes into what I was saying before about what it means to feel othered in spaces that are promoting inclusion, right? So even in all POC spaces or all Black spaces, I think my dark skin has always made me stand out. And so juxtaposing that with being a femme, identifying as a woman, being a dark-skinned woman has led me vulnerable to the realities of misogynoir, colorism, right? So in classrooms where we're giving presentations and folks are being chosen to be the class representative, well, I was not chosen, right? I may have contributed the most in the class, but I was never, my face is not the face that was thought of to be representative of any space. And so internalizing that and battling with what it meant to be highlighted in a room, be highlighted in a space where I thought I deserved recognition, but not getting it. Those were definitely challenges that I had, and those really helped me understand what it meant to have dark skin in this world and the realities I would face because of that. And then even in the workplace, the same thing goes. Definitely having to work much harder to be noticed because I wasn't supposed to be in there in the first place. And so entering a space and trying to do your best and work at the highest productivity is always frustrating and anxiety inducing, even when you have to take into account that your appearance is being judged twofold, right? So I'm a Black woman, but I'm also a dark-skinned Black woman. And that means it's damn near impossible for me to get recognition, for me to get any type of reward or social mobility in a space. So yeah, for me, it's meant struggle, it's meant uncomfortableness, and definitely feelings of like otherness and all these things that made me have to create my own sense of belonging in a space and also have to fight for that, to be valued and acknowledged. So yeah.
Yeah, really thank you for sharing that, right? You know, it's not always easy to kind of talk about those things, especially publicly on like a public platform like this. But it's important for people to be aware of that, right? Like you're saying, you know, you've put the work in, you feel like you should be recognized in whether it be classrooms or work settings, and that's kind of not what's happening. So, and then you having to kind of internalize that, and it's unfortunate, but an outcome is you having to constantly strive and work twice as hard as other people who are kind of being recognized in spaces where, you know, you should highlight it as well, right?
Yeah, and it's also kind of on the converse. I think I didn't just arrive at that space, right? It was a long battle of like me feeling small in spaces because I didn't feel comfortable asserting the fact that I deserved something or that I was working as hard as the next person, right? I didn't want to be labeled as the cocky girl or the overconfident one, which is adjectives that have been used to describe me since I was in elementary school. And thinking of the questions for this interview, experiences in education have often been, the dialogue around my success has often been described as cockiness, overzealous, you know, thinking about my third grade history teacher telling me that I didn't deserve to be on the top of the honor roll list because I was cocky. Well, why was I so cocky? It was because I had to fight to be there. I had to fight for you to say my name as being the first person on that list, because otherwise you would have brushed it off. You would have ignored me. And I was tired of being ignored. The feelings of being invisible and overlooked get frustrating. And so my reaction to that cannot be simply described or phrased as being cocky. Where does that come from, right? So even the critical understanding of my emotions and my responses and reactions to certain spaces have allowed me to understand and apply that same logic to social justice and all these different overarching systems that we engage with, because it's not as abstract as we think it is. You know, these are conversations I have with myself on a daily, right? These are conversations that I can now pinpoint as being as early as third grade, elementary school, and stuff like that. So yeah, the conversation around critical thinking and otherness and what that really meant for me and my personhood has definitely been a long one, dating back for sure.
Yeah, and it's really it's just like empowering the way you speak about it, because it allowed you to go from internalizing what individuals were kind of labeling you as. And I think it also kind of speaks to a lot of the times we focus on the angry Black woman stereotype. Right. But there's also like the superhero Black woman, right? Who's like doing everything kind of stuff. So you almost fall into this weird middle ground between those two stereotypes in that setting. And really cocky is just self-advocacy, right? You are advocating for yourself because others clearly are downplaying you or, you know, perceiving your actions in a certain way. So it's especially great that you were able to kind of come to this as early as those grades, right? Because you're able to stand out more and just know that you're on the right path, right?
Yeah, I definitely attribute my understanding, my, development to community. I'm not the first person who's gone through this, so having folks in my corner who could guide me and who could affirm me and my feelings and emotions was so important for how I reacted to certain spaces I was in, how I internalized these feelings of not belonging. Folks who even ushered me into Binghamton as alum, they very much informed my experiences here, and that's why I feel like I'm able to advocate for others, because folks advocated for me, right? The folks who poured into me allowed me to pour into others. And I think it's really important to ground yourself in community and taking those skills that they've given to you and transferring them to others.
So, yeah, and kind of speaking on that community that helped you kind of get there for your self-advocacy, what are some ways that students in student leadership positions, or maybe just general kinds of student positions on campus, can really advocate and support marginalized student populations?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of our college experience happens outside of the classroom. It happens in the extracurriculars we choose to take up. And so in terms of those who choose to take up, social impact roles on our campus community, it's so important that we are grounding everything we do in the community we're trying to serve. And that doesn't necessarily mean just talking about them. It means talking to them, taking inventory of the folks who are most marginalized in your community. So as a representative of the Black Student Union, I wasn't just talking to the Black folks I saw on other boards, right? I'm not talking to those who are already leading the charge. I'm talking to those who are feeling it the most deeply. I'm talking to the other Black orgs who don't get as much funding, who don't get as much acknowledgement on this campus, So definitely taking inventory of the needs of the most marginalized in your community, the most disparaged, and letting those voices and wants directly impact how you choose to maneuver on this campus, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And even though you're in that leadership role, that's something that any student can be doing, right? They can kind of be like taking those assessments and figuring out how they can have that larger change for the students that need it the most.
Yeah, and I think change doesn't necessarily, it never happens on the bigger level before it happens on the smaller level, right? That's how we get to seeing a George Floyd scholarship, right? It happens when the voices of Black students are heard, when we speak. It's one student, it's two students, it's emails to our president, right? It's rebuttal, it's advocacy for yourself first. And then I think that's when larger, changes or attempts at change can be seen. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a nice combination of the communication skills that you've been able to develop in combination with those critical thinking skills, and using it to really have that lasting change. Mm-hmm. And I think just in general, kind of looking at community organizing, a lot of the times people tend to really focus on the social issues, right? And really raising that awareness. But as you're very familiar with, right, there's a lot of work that goes into working with the community and community Absolutely. Organizing. So can you kind of talk about some of the skills that you've been able to develop through that work?
Yeah, this is interesting because in, developing my resume and like getting ready for the professional world, I was always like reluctant to really put my community work on, because I was like, okay, how is this relevant to what I want to do? But it's completely relevant. Being able to communicate people in the way that they understand, that's a communication skill that not many people have. And so being able to facilitate a workshop around hard issues to talk about that make others uncomfortable, but allowing others to identify with the space that you're creating, that's a skill that not many people have. Community organizing is such an incredible mission, and a lot of the work you see everywhere. You just don't see it as valued because it's labeled as community organizing, right? We have the buzzwords that let you know, oh, this is social justice, but no, it's not. It's communication, it's facilitation, it's leadership, it's marketing. How do you get folks excited to join your rally, to show up to your voting poll or your political fair. It's flyers, it's creating flyers, it's word of mouth, it's canvassing. It's all of these things that, we can easily identify outside of community activism, but it's here too. So, yeah.
Yeah, you highlighted those skills really well. The leadership, the outreach, like you said, you're getting individuals who may not even see the importance of some of these causes,
Exactly.
be engaged. You're facilitating oftentimes difficult conversations, right?
Right.
So from my perspective, I think you're very proactive about your career goals. You kind of have a vision of where you want to be. So can you talk to us more about your career goals, and you did talk about this a little bit, but some more about the experiences that really helped you identify them?
Yeah, this is a fun question to think about. And fun, I mean confusing, because I think as much as I'm confident about the impact I want to have on this world, there's a lot of research that has gone into that. For a long while, I've definitely been interested in public health. But even that, there's so many avenues you can take. I'm just really, really passionate about the intersections of social justice and healthcare in this country and beyond, because I think it's something that doesn't get enough attention. And there's not enough movement that is being materialized to make actual change for folks who are experiencing the worst harm at the hands of our healthcare system. So I definitely see myself as a healthcare professional in public health, whether that be as a researcher, an author, I don't know, but I definitely know that where my passion lies is in public health and its effect on Black communities specifically, and Black maternal health as well. And so the experiences that have helped me identify this, I think it's everything. I really find a lot of power in kind of using my entire life experience to inform everything I do. I don't think anything happens to me in an isolated way. And so whether it's in community or in school or at home, all of these things are reflective of the person that I am, the person that shows up in that space. And that's why, I'm in the spaces that I'm in. So I really try to align everything I do behind the same purpose and behind the same passion that's always been for my community, that's always been for the Black femmes in my life. They're the ones who have nurtured me and loved me and respected me and cared for me in the most meaningful ways. And so I'm sure that's exactly why my career goals and my career passions are aligned with giving back to them and making sure they're okay, because no one ever makes sure we are. And so definitely seeing the need for that care to be returned to my Black femme community is the reason why I do the work that I do. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it answers the general question in the sense of it getting students to really think about their values, right? So for you, your value is giving back to that community, is supporting those who influenced you so much. So really, your advice is to help students to think about what your values are and kind of fit that within your career path.
Yeah, and I also would further elaborate by saying, if the folks who have helped you are in need of help, I think reaching deeper, right? It's not necessarily all about giving back to those who gave to you. I think that's the first step, but it's also, okay, now who else can be helped? Who else can I reach back and pull up with me? Because I'm just in a unique situation where the folks who have helped me are some of the most marginalized in my community, right? And so they're in an even more grave situation, yet they're pouring into me. So that allows me to tap into the folks who are less privileged than me. That inspires me to really take inventory of the space and see where I lay in context to the conversation around privilege, and say, okay, well, these folks aren't here on the Zoom call with you, and why not? And how can I make sure that the next time there's a space where we're highlighting activists, that the more marginalized folks who are doing more work than I am are here speaking their truth? So definitely making sure that there's always a deeper understanding of what it means to, give back, and what it means to pour into those who don't have anyone pouring into them or who have poured into you. So.
Yeah, and kind of looking at that, so a lot of your experiences, though, really, really stem from you putting yourself out there, right? So my last question is, what about the students who have these same kinds of passions, kind of have a little bit of an idea of their career goals, but they're hesitant about putting themselves out there?
I'm definitely an extrovert. I really do like to be, to dive into things. And so I think more spaces need to accommodate folks who aren't like that. I don't think the onus is on introverted folks or, more reserved folks to actively seek out spaces or change anything about them. I think the way we, approach leadership needs to be examined and broadened to encompass the folks who have so many skills to offer, things to bear, but aren't looked at, so I think there's a lot to be said about what we, who we identify as a leader, and making sure that that scope is inclusive of everyone and all leadership styles. So for those who don't really see themselves reflected in leadership spaces, I definitely think tapping into those who are also being excluded, creating community in that. That's how I've kind of survived and been able to, exist in spaces, is leaning on those who look like me, leaning on those who can relate to my experience, and figuring out, okay, now how do we make this experience better? How do we create a different reality for ourselves and for others? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really, it goes both ways, a basic kind of advice, right? Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I know that students will definitely have a lot of takeaways from this conversation. To all the students watching, I will see you on the next one.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's been nice chatting with you.